Hi guys, James here from Positive and from Positive's acquisitions team. I just want to run through today with you an opportunity that has come about and has been in the making for about 3 to 4 years nationally. And many of you may have heard of it. It's run by the government and it's called NDIS housing, and it's a government-backed property investment solution for a very vulnerable sector of the community, that is the disability sector, and its intention is to provide housing for them. And so through this presentation I'm going to dig into what it is and how it sort of works, and also how you guys as property investors can provide such housing and in return get great investment results. So sit back, relax, should take about half an hour or so, 40 minutes, and I'll give you some good insight into the way it works from day dot. So it is really the concept for us as property investors of adding, and this may sound exaggerated, over $30,000 a year in positive cash flow to your income. And these properties are very powerful. They're incentivized by government to provide the housing that's needed, and they do so by paying really good rents for the people that occupy them. And you can expect upwards of 30 grand a year. So, you know, as we go through this, just sort of think in context of what that could do in terms of your household income, your bottom line, so to speak. Many people I speak to, you know, 2 or 3 of those at play could replace one of the members of your household's income quite easily, just to put in context. What we would probably advise in most cases, that you use the strong extra income to pay down some debt, or put to one side for further property, and just really sort of utilize the benefit of it while you can to put to work in a good way. Okay, so what we'll cover as we go through here, what the program is, what NDIS is, and how it works, why you need us and me. I've been working on this for a good 2 years, piecing it all together. It's quite complex, as you can imagine. Anything from government gets quite complex, but also why we need you to make the solution work. And that's sort of talking from the context of us at Positive, and also why the government needs you to deliver this housing solution. Then I'll talk about the sweet spots and you know, the 5 essential elements that make the properties work and the incomes work for you, so that you can be profitable at it. Like anything, there's a bit of a science, there's a sweet spot, there is some rules that you have to include when you're investing in these things. And then lastly, we'll talk about the cost and how much you guys are going to need if you want to venture into this sort of property investment. So who is it for? Well, as I said at the beginning, the government's had this issue, almost a political hotspot, hot potato for some time now, and that has been the disability sector. So there's a sector of our community that suffer from either mental or physical disability, and obviously they kind of need some support in terms of functioning in life, and that can be to the extent of housing, it can be to the extent of finding jobs, care working, social, etc., etc. But really the NDIS is a huge umbrella type scheme that covers all that support, from housing right through to caring to counselling and so on. It's been in the making now for some sort of 4 or 5 years, potentially more, to design it to the way it looks today. And that is what we'll dig into as we go through here. So to start with, what the government are doing is basically throwing their hands up in this situation, saying, look, we've tried the model where we provide all the housing for, or the accommodation for these people, but it's simply not cost effective or efficient for us to do that. And so current government has managed to, and the previous one has managed to push through federal and Commonwealth legislation to change the way it looks, and essentially throw over that sort of solution or remedy finding over to the private sector. They've basically incentivized normal real estate investors, institutional investors and so on, to provide the solution to this much needed space. It can be found in the residential real estate investor space. It's incentivized by way of positive and strong cash flow. And we'll dig into how that sort of looks. And as you go through, just sort of let your skepticism sit to one side for 1 minute and any opinions, good or bad, about this. And I'll sort of show you how it can be very, very good for both sides of the fence in the way it's been delivering or delivered into the community by government. Now we're looking at it for normal investors, and those investors need to be really those interested in residential real estate. They need to be ones that are looking for strong or positive cash flow and over a long term. This is not a very transient sort of tenant that you'll find in this sector. So, you know, we're talking tenancy agreements upwards of 12 months up to sort of 3, 4, 5 years in some cases. We want people looking at this to not simply look at the cash flow alone. You should be looking at strong growth corridors as well. We are putting the solution together in great investment locations, thereby covering some of the downside in terms of the property that you end up paying off. It's got a good sort of investment story behind it as well. And the investor really needs to be someone who's, you know, hands-free. They're not sort of tinkering in the middle of the leasing, you know, playing around with the sort of property and the design. We've put all that together for you in this presentation. I'll show you how it looks. But really the investor's got to be quite mature in their nature and look at, you know, at being sort of hands-off. In addition to those factors, obviously a good ethical mindset. This is a very vulnerable sector of the community that we're doing a good thing for in this type of housing. So it's good for your ethics, and it's good to keep that in mind as you're investing in it. And also people that have got some open mind about getting into new programs early. This is quite new. It's been adopted by each state at different intervals over the last couple of years, and is maturing as we go. So it's a little bit more fiddly than just a regular property investment. And of course, with those sorts of cash flows, 30 grand and upwards, you know, you need to be on board with the concept of paying a bit more tax, because obviously it's going to push your income up quite a bit. So if that's you, great, stick around, listen further. If this is you, this is probably not going to be the type of investment that you would look at. We don't want people sort of having a look at this sort of property if you're in it for a quick flick or buck. It's not the right mindset that you need for this stuff. It's more long-term than that. If you want to be hands-on, change the design, mess around with you know, the build process and so on, it's probably, again, not for you. It's maybe more of just a regular house and land you should be looking at. And then hagglers looking to sort of nickel and dime the process. The underpinning factor in this is that we put together some property that is very well built and built for purpose, but also stands the test of time. And in most cases, I see that people from a zero starting point maybe not fully equipped to do this sort of investment. They either don't quite have enough cash or equity available to purchase these, or simply they just need to get some more rungs on the ladder in the experience of investing. And you know, those wanting decades-long guarantees, again, the government are incentivizing this, throwing it over to the commercial sector, and one of the things that underpins that is, of course, competition to provide better and better housing. So in many cases there aren't guarantees for long decade, you know, it's just not a simple long guarantee sort of period of time for this investment as well. So if any of those are you, well, stick around, but maybe you need to consider some other stuff as well. All right, so a little bit about me. For those of you that don't know, I'm a builder developer by trade. I've been in construction and developing for over 15 years. I'm originally from the UK, and I also work in Positive Real Estate's property coaching team and look after the Perth group and also the acquisitions team inside Positive. Been inside Positive for over 10 years now, and love what I do there. I get a deeper and deeper understanding of property for myself when I help other people do it, and it's great to see the success stories roll through of other people's investment journeys. I'm very entrepreneurial and visionary. It's one of the reasons it sort of led me to look at this around 2 years ago. Like I said, this has been in sort of 2 years in the making to piece it together. It's quite complex. And I'm quite visionary and passionate about putting all the sort of new ideas together and getting some purpose around that. Then lastly, I'm a father of two, dedicated husband, live here in the Gold Coast, and also an investor myself. So you're in good hands, plenty of experience, and sit back and have a look at this opportunity. It's a pretty good one, and well worth your time spent listening to this. So going back to that political hot potato and where it's come from, well, to date, the government have been providing housing solution for the disability sector by way of the majority in sort of group homes and large institutions. So think of care homes and old people's homes and things like that. It's been inadequate, and you'll see why as I go through there, but simply put, it's been very, very costly for the government, and the types of accommodation have been unsuitable for the types of occupancy needs that the disability sort of society has needed. So imagine in your mind's eye the old person's home, something like that, and you've got sort of 20 to 30-year-old mentally disability or mild mental disability, mild physical disability, sort of stationed in there as a solution to something that they've had simply no other choice. So it's been something that multiple governments have been trying to address, and finally it has, over the last 4 or 5 years, been transitioned into what it looks like now, which is the NDIS as we know it today. And like I said, it's broken down into different sectors. We're going to talk about the specialist disability accommodation sector, which is the important one for us as property investors. So NDIS stands for National Disability Insurance Scheme. It's a new scheme designed to change the way that support and care are provided to people with permanent and significant disability. The government Productivity Commission's inquiry in 2011 on disability care and support found that Australia's system of disability support was inadequate and underfunded, fragmented and inefficient, and gave people with disability little choice and no certainty of access to appropriate support. As such, they went about reformatting it, and the NDIS in its current format being rolled out nationally across Australia. It was passed at government, sort of federal and Commonwealth level laws, and each state were given a sunset date to adopt the policy and scheme, and they adopted into their own sort of specific little requirements in and around the framework that sits over the top. It's an estimated 22 billion in the first year of operation cost, and 700 odd million of that budget is a reoccurring annual budget for the specialist disability accommodation side of the life. So that's the one that's important to us. Individuals eligible for the scheme are assessed, and individualized support packages are developed, funded. NDIS access planning and payments are managed by the National Disability Insurance Agency, NDIA. And the following graph, extracted from the Productivity Commission's October 27 study report, outlines the expected growth in NDIS uptake through 2020. Now you can see there at 2017, the little arrow that says we are here. That's obviously a little bit outdated. We're now in 2019, where we've gone through this sort of trial phase. They did a proof of concept and estimates and so on, to then where it was rolled out into a transitional phase and delivered on the ground state by state. The most recent state into the scheme is WA. They joined in June last year, and they were the last ones sort of in, so to speak. So it's sort of newest in WA at the moment, but it is a national thing. All states are delivering in line with these sort of projections. Okay, so a little brief overview of the important stuff for us as property investors. The NDIS program, or SDA, Specialist Disability Accommodation. It is, like I said, a 700 million federal government program. It's aimed at giving people with disability independence and choice. That very much underlines the whole policy. It is designed to not simply just say, okay, you need help, this is where we're going to shove you. It is designed to give the people with disability some choice, some independence. After all, in most cases, they yearn for that and crave just some normality and some independence, and can very much live that sort of life without too much interference. Currently, there's 12,000 people in accommodation that doesn't meet their needs. Many surveys were done around those sorts of people, and their sort of unsatisfied opinion of where they currently held, and mostly they are funded by the state governments right now. Each state will run their own version of the NDIS program. So like I said, each state will condense the legislation, or are condensing the legislation in their own right, but this presentation does sort of talk about it in terms of rolling out on the ground by state. Collects certain points that are common across all states. The existing accommodation represents about $5 billion worth of infrastructure, and the NDIS program will stimulate, and is designed to stimulate, a further $5 billion worth of more appropriate accommodation. So more appropriate accommodation means giving them the choice of that accommodation. So as we go through this, there is very much for you as an investor to consider that the better the home you deliver, the more in demand it will become as this unfolds on the ground. There are 45% of people that want to move into the NDIS program that have indicated they are not currently happy, and the housing as it becomes available. 16,000 more people not currently in any of these existing programs that will move into the program as well. So there is a huge demand unfolding. Simply put, over the last sort of 10 years, it's almost been a bit of a poison chalice. If a person with disability raised their hand for some kind of support, it was kind of a yep, here you go, here's some support, but you've got to lump it or leave it type situation, which has been one of the factors to address. And so what that has led to is obviously many of them not putting their hand up for support and just getting by on their own right. The Summer Foundation, which is a body in the disability sector, have done numerous studies, and they estimate that 33,000 people will also come out of the woodwork and join the program as it unfolds as well. So we're talking sort of 45 to 50,000 people to be a part of the accommodation space as NDIS unfolds. It is essentially a massive social welfare program for very vulnerable people, as I've said all the way through. This is a long-term government issue, and often when I talk to people about this, they sort of say to me, "Oh, how long is it going to be around? Is it one of those sort of it'll just go after 1 or 2 years? Is it a short or long-term thing?" Well, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the world's biggest accounting firm, released a report, and they believe it to be in place for at least the next 20 years. In addition to that, I mean, just consider the logics behind it. It has taken government quite some years to reformat it and redevelop it into what it looks like now. It's going to take a very, very bold government to try and backtrack and reverse out of the commitments they've made here, given that, one, it is a huge social welfare program for the vulnerable, for a very vulnerable sector of our community. And to mess around with that or leave those people with inadequate support would be fairly unjust, if you like, or for want of a better word. It would be fairly irresponsible for any government to come along and mess with that. It's not a pink bat scheme, for example, that Queensland had. It is humans and lives involved. Now, when we have a look into it in more detail and what it means in terms of income and the types of investor returns, well, have a look here where it says house 3 residents. That is a good rule of thumb to use, and if we look at these sort of columns from standard to robust, those are the numbers you can expect to achieve in a 3 or 4 bedroom dwelling. And those 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings obviously have to have some design changes and a few extra things put into them. But simply, we've developed a sort of design and delivery sort of system that makes these dwellings look all but normal to the naked eye, but also qualifies them for this type of income. So obviously that's pretty attractive. You can get upwards of 78,000 per annum on a simple, for example, 550 house, going right up to sort of 100,000 with overnight support in that robust column. So with the types of homes we're delivering, we're targeting these sort of the standard to robust section, which is perfectly adequate income for the investor, and also a nice, easy product to deliver for the disability person. And it's also a type of dwelling that can stand the test of time in terms of its normal investment characteristics. It's the type of dwelling that doesn't look too institutional. It doesn't look like a hospital ward or anything like that. It looks all but a normal property in a normal street and community. These numbers are a national median. There are some adjustments by location. They can go up or down, and there is a few little vacancy splits and so on by design that you would have to include in there. So I've just included here the national median, but it's a good rule of thumb to use when you're assessing this stuff. So, you think about your interest and repayments and so on a 550 property where you're looking, what, 27, 35 grand at most per annum, and you're receiving upwards of sort of 65, 70,000, which obviously then subtract the two will give you your nice little 30 grand a year uplift. Now, when we have a look at the numbers, obviously we say, okay, well, that's great. Okay, those cash flows look amazing. That looks great. This is, the most the most common question I get when looking at this. Well, that that doesn't sound real. That sounds way too good to be true. Surely there's no people or no demand. Well, and then is this another government rip-off scheme? Well, I'll show you some insight into each of those questions just to debug that, and it's certainly something that I initially thought when I first looked at it. But the demand as it sits today, there are some 28,000 Australians that require specialist disability accommodation. 4,000 additional people will require their existing accommodation to be replaced. And then there is an estimated 33,200 additional people have been identified as being able to qualify for the accommodation that are estimated to come out of the woodwork along the way. So we're talking over 60,000 in terms of numbers. Yes, they are dispersed around the country, and that demand at the moment sits like this. By state, existing SDA residents on the left there, and then per capita distribution. As you can imagine, the more populous states have a higher quantity, and then it gives us the difference on the right. So we can see that New South Wales has got quite a big difference, Queensland as well, over 2,000, Victoria as well, nearly 3,000. Across Australia, 17,500 people currently live in supported accommodation. The SDA funding under the NDIS is estimated to support 28,000 after that. And a gap of 10,500 places across Australia exists on the basis of current supply. Okay, so that is less the 33,000 that are starting to raise a hand as it gets rolled out across our states. Most of those people in the demand sector are aged between around 45, so 25 to 44, and 45 to 49. So they're really not appropriate to be put in aged care or group homes and things like that. They would prefer some independence and some choice around it. So, in general, the indication is they're very happy about this new policy funding and scheme being unrolled, and it does leave some good opportunity for them to better their lives. So, having a look back at this hot potato that the government has now dealt with, it shows where they were residing or are residing as they sort of move around to better choice. And the graph on the right shows most people currently living in specialist disability accommodation are aged between 25 to 59 with a median age of 46. So the current residents in dark, and then the prospective residents similar in terms of age. But have a look at the prospective ones. There is quite a few more in that 25 to 44 and 18 to 24 bracket than there are the higher ones. So there is this sort of younger profile unfolding. And those people have sort of had to lump it and leave it and where they've been living for, again, want of a better term, but they haven't simply wanted to raise a hand because the choice has not been a very appealing one. So there is a much younger age profile of people potentially seeking SDA in the future, median age of 34. If we have a look at the demand in terms of mapping, and this map is provided by SGS Economics and Planning, and the darker areas are low supply potential shortfall, high current supply is in the white. So you can see typically the higher demand or the shortfall of accommodation does fall around our capital cities, predominantly on the East Coast and Perth, with a small amount there being in Adelaide as well. There is some greater incentive for investors that want to venture into regional areas, and obviously it's quite easy to deliver properties there as well. In those regional areas, there is quite a bit of a shortfall in this type of accommodation, just through the sheer nature of the geography involved in delivering accommodation up there. Okay, so the 1 to 857 ratio can be used to highlight locations of clear undersupply of SDA places across Australia. Not that current supply reflects historic decisions about provisions of supported accommodation, but by governments. So what that really means is there is a certain level of statistics on this, but it is something that is also being gathered as it gets rolled out. With these new additions to the people needing or wanting the funding support and the accommodation support, that's growing all the time, and obviously that is changing the mapping quite somewhat as you go. So it's very important when you look at this to really be in front of the mapping in terms of where you would provide a home for this type of accommodation. And that's where we're very integral in working with certain groups to find the best locations to deliver houses. And then we overlap that with a really good investment sort of mapping as well to make sure that the investment that people are making is a good one in its own right. So just a quick one there, it's a little bit wordy. SDA supply and demand. 2018 report by SGS Economics and Planning examined the eastern states, finding the current supply and distribution of SDA cannot accommodate projected future demand. So it just sums up that there is a huge undersupply unfolding as we speak, and the government's solution to that is to incentivize investors to go out there and develop property that accommodates disability people. The 17,500 people currently live in supported accommodation, and the SDA funding under NDIS is estimated to support 28,000 people today. And it further estimates 33,000 over and above the 17,000 already in this form of housing to be coming out of the woodwork. Of these people, 6,200 are under 64. So we know that there is a good majority there under sort of 45, and we know that there is a high demand there, almost double what's currently in the system. And the majority of current and potential residents are under the age of 45. Research undertaken by the Summer Foundation, which is that body I mentioned before. So mostly younger people with high support needs and living with family or living in group homes or aged care indicated a strong desire to change their living arrangements. So not only do we know that there are quite a considerable amount of people requiring this accommodation, but they are indicating that they would prefer some choice and that they would move if they had that choice, namely moving to their own place and finding greater independence and privacy while maintaining proximity to family. Okay, so more than 2/3 of these participants is a different word for tenant, if you like, for us property investors, in the NDIS world then referred to as participants, in the survey preferred to be living with different people to their current situation. So how does it work if we unfold it as a property investor? It's a little bit complex, like I said. What happens at the top end is there is a federal budget of $700 million per annum, and that is dedicated towards accommodation. That then is drawn down by the states and is drawn down on a per capita basis and paid out through NDIA to the individual property investors. Now, it's not just a simple, I'm a property investor, you wave your hand or you build one and, advertise it on realestate.com. It's quite an intricate sort of system that you have to use to get this all to work and to get all the stakeholders to work together. And that is really where we have spent much of our time piecing it together and putting all those stakeholders together. And I'll show you why we obviously are integral in the system, and so are you, to get it all to work. But essentially it looks like this. The property provider is in the middle. That big square in the middle obviously is the home. Property investors over to the right, and then there is a property provider. That is us. So we are a registered property provider under NDIS, and essentially run your property for you. So you're a property investor, you purchase the property, and you engage us to provide that property to the tenants or participants, the people with disability needing new accommodation. In addition to that, we also hold an agreement with care providers, and those care providers are the ones that are together with the participants on a daily basis. They're talking to them, working with them to enhance their living situation and give them independence and so on. And they're meeting with them, in many cases multiple times a day to go through, their living situation and so on. Now, each of those individual stakeholders has to work in sync with one another. The property investor, the property provider, the tenants or participants, and the care providers. Now, obviously, as you can imagine, as a property investor, that's all quite daunting. We're going, you simply want to set and forget and receive such higher income. You don't want to be coming home from work daily to lots of rigmarole and paperwork and so on, claiming through government systems, talking with care providers, and so on. So that's where we've come into the fray and sort of piece that together. What we want to help investors do is have an opportunity to invest in great properties with great returns, and then also hold hands with them along the process that is quite complex to ensure that they're not simply delivering a property without any end game involved. So they can actually get the property towards the people that need it and want it and live in it, and they can also receive great incomes for doing that. And so we've pieced that together. It's kind of integral on those three components, and then as a property provider, we simply pay down to you the income to you as a property investor. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit sort of cumbersome, as most things are with government, but once you sort of get to grips with it, it all becomes quite clear. Now, I've put this in here because one of the biggest questions I get when people's skepticism sort of tweaks in their mind, as is so easy to do, is they look at this sort of stuff and go, oh, well, is this simply another rip-off for the taxpayer? Are we simply funding another social welfare scheme that will or will not achieve the results it's supposed to? Well, contrary to that, this is actually a huge cost-saving exercise. And to put that in context, me and my wife had our kids at a hospital in the Gold Coast called Pindara. And it's a private hospital, and as part of the package there, they offer, after you've had your baby, that you go to the Versace Hotel. So you spend 2 nights in the hospital, and then you go to the Versace Hotel in one of their suites for a further 3 nights. And when we first went in there to have our kids, this sort of seemed a bit strange to me. It seemed cool, but strange. And I asked one of the nurses, what is the benefit of this to the hospital? And she simply replied with, well, it costs us about $5,000 a night to keep couples in the hospital, with the cost of the rooms, all the equipment, the doctors and nurses, and so on. And you have a mediocre time, it's okay, but it's not like the Versace, and it costs us $600 or $700 a night to put you in the Versace, and you get to spend some nice time there, getting to know your baby, hanging out with a couple of midwives on call in the corridor, and you have a far better time. And this resonated with me on this concept of specialist disability accommodation. Simply put, it costs the government thousands of dollars per night to house people with disability in what has been surveyed to be totally inadequate for them. They can put them into normal dwellings that they get a choice for, or a choice with, for less than 1/3 the cost. It can cost them simply sort of $1,500 a week, and those people get a far better living situation and one that they can choose. So really it comes down to the government actually watching the bottom line and trying to save money. And at the same time, finding a solution that actually benefits the people that are looking for the accommodation. So, when you're letting that sort of thought process kick in, well, just sort of look past that and dig deeper into the detail. It's government's solution to saving money and providing a better situation for the people that need it. And I thought that was a really good context, which didn't really dawn on me until I asked the nurse in the hospital when we had our kids. All right, so here's having a look at the system and process in a little bit more detail. And this is where I'm going to talk about why we need you and you need us to deliver this. It's not, like I said, simply building or developing a property and throwing it into the market and hoping that multiple people will apply and you claim it. There is a certain set of steps and stakeholders that are all involved. And we've pieced it all together. And of course, we want to be efficient in piecing the property provider part of our business together and also be efficient in delivering you the incomes as a property investor that you need. So it's important that we all hold hands in the process. So, brief overview of the program again. To sell you a property and realize a profit is why we like a typical 4-bedroom home for the system. So, being a member of Positive, you can of course purchase one of these properties through us. And you buying one, it needs to do as advertised on the tin. It needs to make you good money, and equally, it needs to be efficient for us to run on your behalf. These dwellings are a lot more appealing for the NDIS participant or tenant, so they will be chosen as the housing solution. We've developed it into a 4-bedroom style home that looks all but normal, with some design changes, but is appealing as well for people looking for this type of accommodation. And it's something we keep enhancing as we go through. We keep enhancing the designs, we keep getting that feedback direct from the participants of what they're looking for, and keep enhancing the whole process all the way through. In addition to that, for us to provide the accommodation to the government, it's more efficient if we do them in kind of groups of 4 in the same postcode or region. So you may be looking at these and you'll likely see them come through your coach or property consultant in sort of groups of 4. And they won't be in the same street, they won't be next door to each other, but they will be sort of in the vicinity of one another. It's far more efficient for carers to come and go from those properties when they've got 4 in an area that they can go to. Or a couple more here and there that they can go to multiple times a day. They don't want to be driving hours and hours back and forth between homes. In addition to that, there are some quirky little design additions you can make depending on your budget and so on, where you can actually chase down higher income if you have separate rooms for a carer to stay on site overnight, or somebody else to stay in the dwelling. So in summary, we need 4 houses in the vicinity of one another to run an efficient model of management and care, and you need over 2 to 4 tenants to get the maximum rent possible. So those two working in synergy mean a profitable outcome all the way through, and also a solution in terms of the housing that actually benefits the people it's designed for. So as I say, this is why we need you, you need us, and it is an important agreement between us all that we work together. All right, so over to item number 3 on what we will cover, the essential elements of doing this. Now, there is 5 areas to these properties to hit the sweet spot of success with it. There is a certain level of landlord compliance. There is a sweet spot of quantity of tenants, 2 to 4 typically is the higher income. There is obviously an integral member of this situation, the care provider, those that are caring for the tenants. And then, of course, we want to put them in the right areas, those with demand, and the right areas for an investment solution as well. And the property itself has to comply with certain design requirements. It cannot simply be designed and built to a normal standard. It has to be designed and built and signed off to a minimum standard under the disability process to be accepted for use in the program. So we'll go through one by one. Area with demand. No tenants, obviously no rent, no management. So we, when piecing this all together in terms of where we choose to build or to find one of the or input one of these properties into the community, are conscious of us delivering them from a management perspective and conscious of you guys purchasing one or investing in one from a rent perspective. So we look at the background info, the supply data, both from a normal investment point of view and from a NDIS point of view. So we try and overlap the two, and we're working closely with groups to really zero in on that demand for or that shortfall of disability housing, and also that demand and shortfall for appropriate investing. So that should you decide not to keep putting your property into the NDIS scheme, then you can simply rent it out to normal tenants and simply rent it in a strong market. So we're chasing that area mapping all the time and staying in front of that. Now the property compliance, this is the design and build component to it. It is 30 pages of specifications that the house needs to be certified for. If it is not certified for this, then the NDIS will not accept the property into the scheme. They have to see certain paperwork to accept it as a property that is equipped to accommodate disability people. Okay, so we've been working with some of Australia's biggest building groups to design this stuff and design it well. And they're warranted to complete the builds through to a level that will be accepted. And in addition to that, we've worked on a design components to it that make them more and more desirable for tenants, all while at the same time not sacrificing in too much way the appeal and look of the dwelling into the normal market as well. So to the naked eye, and I'll show you a little example at the end of this, the properties look all but the same as a normal investment property. But when you zero in on it, we've included over 30 pages of design specifications, and the builders are building them to those specifications and signing them off to a level that will be accepted by the government. So it's critical that those pieces all pull together. And then in addition to that, like any property investment that you would build, the better the property, the better the design, the better the build, the more appealing that property is going to be, both in the disability sector and then in the normal investment or retail sector. So there's quite a few dynamics to it. Then there is the landlord. So that is you as the landlord. Now we hold hands in this situation and are the property provider. And we pay through the income through to you, less a little management fee. So we are a government supplier and have registered as such. We have experience in running a property management business. As you may or may not know, we've got quite a substantial one in Brisbane, and we've got experience in running trust accounts and the compliance that comes with that and property management. So these are very vulnerable people that we're looking after, and it's important that they are catered for adequately when it comes to property management and landlord compliance. That's why we have registered as a provider, as a government supplier, and deliver that property to the government as a property that's approved for accommodation. And we run all the compliance and trust accounting and management, property management and so on to make your home adequately equipped to be in the scheme. And we tick and check all those boxes along the way to ensure that we are a responsible supplier of housing for a group that needs it. Now the 2 to 4 tenants. So about 2 tenants is around 10 to 15 grand more than, let's say, a 5% rental yield on a 550 property. So 2 tenants or above is really the sweet spot. It's not the highest at 2 tenants, but it's definitely more than normal. So it's a worst case outcome. So simply, just like I said, building a home and sticking it on realestate.com and hoping you can put it into the system is not going to work. You've got to make all the pieces of the puzzle work together. And you've got to make them appealing to entice more tenants to move into your property. Typically about 3 is the median, and 3 will get you similar figures to those that I showed you in the slide earlier. So to do this, you need the right NDIS coordinator, you need the right design of the home, and you need the right furnishings. You will have to furnish this property as well. Don't forget, if there's a couple of people living there together that are unrelated, they're unlikely to bring the furniture. So we will have to furnish these properties. And number 4, you need all the stakeholders to work in sync. You need all these people to work as one. So the less quantity of people you can have involved, or the more that are under one umbrella, as we've put it together, the more successful you're going to be. Then there's the care provider. The care provider is committed to keeping the property full. Often these care providers are not for profit, but they sustain their ability to be better and better care providers by invoicing government for their services as a care provider. And they do that on a per person basis. As such, it is therefore their advantage that the more people they can get into adequate housing, the more people they have on their books and can care for, and the more people they can deliver, their missions and visions and values to do that, and also the more they can grow their income and deliver their services. We need the scale, and we need multiple homes to be efficient in this space, and so do they. So simply going back to the geographical component, having one property on Western Sydney and one property in the Northern Beaches is not going to be efficient for those guys to look after the properties for you or look after the people in them. So as you can see, our interests align with yours. We are looking to hold hands with you all the way through this process and have a successful situation all the way through. The 5 pillars of success, just to recap, are those, and all combined together, working in sync, will give you the best results. Once that's in play, just a reminder of how it looks. The money flows down from the budget for accommodation into the NDIS and is claimed per person in your property and paid down to you as the investor. So you're almost like a silent partner, but you're the bricks and mortar owner. So quick example here of the types of cash flow that you can look at and what it means in terms of weekly. And I've been quite conservative with these just to give you a sort of a bit of a worst case. So 3 tenants on the left, like I said, that's about the median and a bit of a sweet spot. It doesn't overpopulate the home. It's still good income, and it's a little bit more obtainable than say sort of two tenants. So I've based these numbers on 550 type property purchase price, and in that property, based on those figures and the earlier slides, the rent could be about 79 or 80,000 a year. Interest I've used at 5%. Management, that is the property providers, that's us, to manage the entire process, is 10%, so nearly 8 grand a year. And then I've used an example rates of $1,600 and insurance of about 5,000. There is a little bit of additional insurance you need as a property owner in this space. And so I've upped that a little there to what is regular for property investment. So about 5 grand per annum. Total cost 41,000, cash flow of $730 per week. And if you have a look over to 4 tenants, 750. And even at 2 tenants, you're close to 200 a week positive. So when you have a look against a normal rental in a 550 property at 530 per week, there's your sort of, that's a before tax cash flow there. So you're about negative 77 before tax. Obviously that becomes a bit more positive after tax in that situation. So it's pretty good outcomes. In many cases that can replace someone's income. Or simply take care of your home repayments or pay down the debt super fast. I would recommend you do any one of those as you go through looking at this. What do the homes look like? Well, like I said, they look all but normal. These come in the form of house and land packages. They typically cost you between about 8 and 15 grand more for the build than a normal house and land. The land is obviously normal. And to the naked eye, they look all but normal in terms of their design. So there are those 30 pages of design inclusions in there. hidden in there, things like slightly bigger floor areas in and around the kitchen bench, in certain bathrooms, a couple of wider doors, and so on and so on. But all intents and purposes, you've very much covered the downside of your investment. Should you wish to take it out of the NDIS system and not rent it to disability anymore and simply put it back to a normal rental, well, you'll find that you've just got a slightly more voluminous, free-flowing home than you would have if you hadn't have done it in the first place, and you can go into a normal rental market and normal sales situation when you go to sell it later. And we're very conscious of putting together some designs that downside was covered. So if you decide to turn it off at any one time, or just say to yourself, I'll give it a run for 3 to 5 years, for example, pay off the debt, and then you've got a nice normal dwelling on land with no debt over it or very low debt, that is renting at its normal sort of 5% rental yield. So it's a pretty cool outcome if you do take that sort of concept to it. So when you're looking at these on the way through, what I normally work with on people is a couple of questions they should ask themselves when looking at the types of properties. If you're sitting down looking at this, one is, are you happy to invest in that property in its own right, assuming that you're not putting it into the NDIS system? And are you happy to spend the money on it for all of the above as a normal investment property? If the answer is yes, great. All you're then simply doing is having a look at its ability to become an NDIS property. And that will simply be the decision of saying, am I happy to spend a further, let's say, 15 grand on the design to deliver it as an NDIS property? And am I happy to spend around 25 grand on a furniture pack, which is 100% tax deductible in year one? If those two are yes, then this sort of stuff is certainly for you. You can invest in this, upgrade the home design, input a furniture package, all of which we take care of, and expect upwards of 30 grand a year in cash flow. So they're a pretty cool investment, and I'm sure you've got more questions. There's 3 ways that you can become one of the investors. Options 2 and 3 are pending and not yet available, but option 1, owning outright, typically what you're going to need, if you're considering this, is around 120 grand in cash or equity. By the time you've covered your stamp duty, deposits, and furniture, you're going to need about 120 grand, somewhere around there, for a 550 property. And obviously to service that, you're going to need pretty good household incomes as well. Somewhere around, 100, 120 grand a year household income. In return, for committing to one, you'll receive sort of 800 bucks a week, 43 grand a year, and you'll get some capital growth and good depreciation as well over the building as it exists in the market. So if this is for you, certainly reach out to your coach, your PC, and they'll run you through some of the properties that are available. Like I said, these properties are quite finite. We piece them together and deliver them sort of 4 or so at a time in similar areas. So it's probably worth you going through the process of getting ready for one, if that is you, and then being ready for one as it appears and putting your name on the list, so to speak. So that's the end for today. Any questions you've got, certainly reach out to your PC or coach, or direct it back to me, and I'd be happy to answer the question for you. Take care. Talk soon.